The abandoned asylum that still has patients. For decades, Ravenwood Asylum stood on the outskirts of town like a festering wound, forgotten, decayed, and swallowed by the forest that had slowly crept over its crumbling walls. It had been abandoned for nearly 50 years, its halls once filled with the broken minds that society had cast aside. No one dared go near it. The townspeople whispered about the horrors that had taken place there, the patients who had disappeared, the inhumane experiments, the screams that still echoed through the night. But for urban explorers like me, it was irresistible. I had heard the stories, of course, the legends about how Ravenwood hadn't been fully abandoned, how the most dangerous patients had been left behind, trapped in the asylum when it shut down. They were said to still wander the halls, unseen but always watching. Some even claimed that if you stayed long enough, you'd hear the whispers of doctors, the shuffle of slippered feet, and the distant echoes of gurneys rolling down the hall. I never believed in ghost stories. Armed with a flashlight, a camera, and my curiosity, I set out one cold October night to explore the asylum. My plan was simple: spend an hour inside, take some photos, maybe catch some eerie footage for my channel, and leave. Nothing too risky. But as I stepped through the rusted gate and into the overgrown courtyard, a chill crawled up my spine. The air was thick, heavy with something unseen, something that made my stomach twist in discomfort. The front doors hung open as if inviting me in. Inside, the asylum was a tomb of peeling wallpaper, shattered glass, and the lingering scent of mildew. My flashlight flickered across broken wheelchairs, rusted bed frames, and crumbling patient files scattered across the floor. The silence was suffocating, pressing against my ears like cotton. Then, somewhere deep within the building, a floorboard creaked. I froze. Rats, I told myself, just rats. But as I moved further inside, the air grew colder, thick with the scent of antiseptic and something metallic, something wrong. The hallway stretched before me, its ceiling sagging, its walls lined with doors leading to patient rooms. I picked one at random, nudging it open with the toe of my boot. Inside, the bed was still made. That was the first thing that unsettled me. The sheets, though covered in dust, were tucked in neatly, as if waiting for someone to return. A patient's file sat on the bedside table, its pages yellowed with age. I picked it up, brushing away decades of grime to read the name scrawled across the top. Subject, patient number 63, do not release. A loud bang echoed. I whipped around, heart hammering against my ribs. My flashlight trembled in my grasp, its beam dancing wildly over the peeling walls. The sound had come from further down the corridor, a door slamming shut with the force of something, or someone on the other side. I wasn't alone. My breath came in short, panicked bursts. I considered turning back, leaving right then and there. But something compelled me forward, a reckless mix of curiosity and terror pushing me toward the sound. Each step felt heavier, as if the building itself didn't want me there. The hallway led to a larger common area, its ceiling lined with rusted light fixtures that swayed gently, though there was no wind. Then I saw them. In the shadows, figures stood motionless. At first, I thought they were mannequins left behind for therapy exercises. But as I lifted my flashlight, the beam illuminated something far worse. Patients. At least a dozen of them stood in the room, dressed in tattered hospital gowns, their faces obscured by darkness. Their heads were tilted at unnatural angles, their eyes fixed on me. Not a single one moved. I took a step back. They took a step forward. Panic clawed at my throat. I turned to run, but the hallway behind me had changed. Where there had once been a clear path to the exit, now stood another row of figures, silent, waiting. A voice crackled through the darkness, distant, as if coming through an old intercom system. Dr. Larson, please report to room 6. The treatment is ready. The voice was cold, sterile, and it made my blood turn to ice. My flashlight flickered, and in that brief moment of darkness, I felt movement, felt them getting closer. I ran. Blinded by panic, I sprinted down the hallway, careening into walls, tripping over debris. The whispers grew louder, overlapping voices murmuring about procedures, medications, restraints. They filled my ears, filled my head, made it impossible to think. Then I saw it. The front door, still slightly ajar. I lunged for it, throwing myself outside, collapsing onto the cold, wet grass. The night air hit me like a shockwave, and the whispers stopped. I scrambled to my feet and turned back, expecting to see them standing in the doorway, watching me. But the asylum was empty. The door was shut, as if it had never been opened. I never went back. Weeks later, when I reviewed my footage, I found something that made my stomach drop. The video showed me walking through the asylum, my flashlight illuminating the empty halls. But in the background, in the darkened corners of every room I entered, they were there, watching. The curse of the old family portrait. It all started when Olivia inherited the house. She had never even seen it before. Her estranged grandmother's Victorian home, nestled deep in the countryside, far from any town or city. The house had remained empty for years, its existence a family secret. Her parents never spoke of it, and whenever she asked about her grandmother, their faces would darken, their voices would drop to a whisper. But when the lawyer called, informing her that she was the sole heir to the property, curiosity outweighed her unease. The house was exactly what one would expect from an old abandoned estate. Dust clung to every surface, the air was thick with the scent of decay, and the wooden floors groaned under her every step. But what stood out the most, what sent an immediate shiver down her spine, was the massive portrait in the main hallway. It was an old oil painting of a family dressed in 19th century clothing. A man, a woman, and 2 children stood in front of the very same house, their expressions solemn, their eyes piercing. But what unsettled Olivia the most was how realistic the eyes looked, as if they were watching her. And then, as she walked past it, she swore she saw them move. The unsettling changes. Determined to ignore the unease clawing at her, Olivia settled into the house, planning to restore it and sell it. That night, as she lay in bed, the wind howled outside, rattling the windows. She tossed and turned, unable to shake the feeling of being watched. By morning, the sensation had only grown stronger. As she made her way downstairs, something made her stop in her tracks. She turned toward the painting. Something was different. The family's expressions had changed. The solemn looks had been replaced with faint smiles, twisted, unnatural grins. The mother's hand, which had previously rested on her daughter's shoulder, now seemed to be pointing directly at Olivia. A chill ran down her spine. She forced herself to shake off the paranoia. It was just a trick of the mind, she told herself. A painting couldn't change on its own. Could it? The whispering at night. The nights in the house became unbearable. Every time Olivia drifted to sleep, she was awakened by the sound of faint whispering. At first, she thought it was the wind, but the voices became clearer, murmured words, hushed discussions. One night, she decided to investigate. She tiptoed down the hallway, the air heavy with an oppressive presence. As she neared the portrait, the whispering stopped, and then a single word was uttered, right beside her ear. Run. A cold breath grazed her skin. Olivia spun around, but she was alone. Her pulse pounded in her ears. She had to get out of this house. She needed to leave. Now, the truth behind the portrait. Desperate for answers, Olivia searched through the house, hoping to find any record of the people in the portrait. Eventually, in the attic, she found a locked trunk. After prying it open, she discovered stacks of old photographs, letters, and a faded newspaper clipping. Her breath hitched as she read the headline: Local family perishes in house fire. Portrait remains unscathed. The article detailed a tragedy from over a century ago. The family and the painting had died in a fire that had consumed the house, yet their portrait had survived, completely untouched. Rumors spread that their spirits had become trapped within it, their souls lingering, waiting for someone to take their place. Olivia's blood ran cold. She knew what she had to do. Breaking the curse. Determined to rid herself of the sinister presence, Olivia grabbed the painting from the wall and carried it outside. The moment she stepped onto the porch, the wind picked up violently, howling around her as if the house itself was screaming. She struck a match and dropped it onto the painting. The flames engulfed the canvas, but instead of the smell of burning paint, the air filled with the acrid scent of something decayed. A piercing scream echoed through the night, a sound so unnatural it made Olivia's knees buckle. Faces twisted in agony within the flames, mouths open in silent screams before disintegrating into ash. Then silence. The air grew still. The oppressive weight that had haunted her since she arrived was gone. The house was just a house again. Empty, abandoned, but no longer malevolent. She left the next morning and never looked back. And as the house stood empty once more, the ashes of the cursed portrait scattered in the wind, taking with them the whispers of the long-dead family, finally free, or perhaps simply waiting for their next victim. I found a VHS tape that wasn't meant to be seen. I never should have gone into that thrift store. It was one of those hole-in-the-wall places, the kind that smelled like dust and forgotten memories. I had wandered in on a rainy afternoon, looking to kill some time. The place was cluttered with old furniture, faded books, and odd trinkets that no one had touched in years. But what caught my attention was a small cardboard box in the corner, filled with VHS tapes. Most of them were old movies and home recordings, their labels faded or missing entirely, but one stood out. It was a black cassette with no markings, no title, nothing to indicate what it contained. Something about it sent a chill down my spine, but curiosity got the better of me. I bought it for $1 and took it home. That night, I dusted off my old VCR and slid the tape inside. The screen flickered to life, static crackling before revealing grainy footage. The timestamp in the corner read 0:17 a.m., April 12, 1997. The footage began in a dimly lit room. The camera was shaky, handheld. A man stood in the center, facing away from the lens. He was breathing heavily, his posture rigid. Something about the way he stood sent a wave of unease through me. Then he turned around. His face was distorted, not like a camera glitch, but as if something had pulled and twisted his features into something inhuman. His mouth stretched unnaturally wide, his eyes hollow and black. He opened his mouth, and though no sound came through the speakers, I could feel him screaming. The tape cut to static. I ejected the VHS, my hands trembling. I told myself it was some kind of weird art project or a prank, but deep down I knew something was wrong. I should have destroyed it then and there. Instead, I let curiosity win. I pressed play again. This time, the footage showed a different scene. A woman sat on the floor of a dimly lit room rocking back and forth. Her hair was wild, her fingers clawing at the wooden floor. The camera zoomed in slowly as she whispered something over and over. The words were barely audible, but when I listened closely, I heard it. He sees you. The tape cut out again. My stomach twisted. My apartment felt suddenly smaller, the shadows in the corners darker than before. I reached for the remote to turn off the VCR when something shifted on the screen. The footage was still playing. The camera was inside a house now, a house that looked eerily familiar. The angle shifted, and my breath caught in my throat. It was my apartment. The view was from my living room, pointing down the hall that led to my bedroom. The timestamp had changed. 3:42 a.m. Tonight. A figure stood at the end of the hall, half hidden in the shadows. It was tall, with elongated limbs and a head that tilted unnaturally to one side. The camera zoomed in, inch by inch, until I could see its eyes, black, hollow voids staring directly into the lens. And then it moved, a single step forward. Then another. The tape cut to black. I turned off the TV, my heart hammering in my chest. My apartment was silent, except for my own ragged breathing. I tried to tell myself it was a coincidence, that it had to be some kind of elaborate trick. Then I heard it, a soft creak from the hallway. I refused to look. I would not look. I grabbed the VHS tape, yanked it from the VCR, and ran outside. The night air was freezing, but I didn't care. I sprinted to the nearest dumpster and hurled the tape inside, slamming the lid shut. I never went back to retrieve it. For weeks, I barely slept. Every creak, every shadow, every whisper of wind sent me into a panic. But eventually, life went on. The fear faded, the memory became just another nightmare, until last night. I came home late, exhausted from work. I tossed my jacket on the couch and turned on the TV, needing some background noise to drown out my thoughts. The screen flickered to life. Static. And then, the hallway. The timestamp read 3:42 a.m., and the figure was there, only this time it was standing closer.